The sound of the kettle whistling in the small kitchen filled the house as Susan finished setting the table for dinner. The aroma of the beef stew she was lovingly preparing filled the air, blending with the woody scent of the old furniture. That modest home, filled with love, had always been enough for the two of them, until now. The front door swung open with a bang. Charles walked in, wearing a suit that clearly didn't match their social status. The sharp cut of the fabric, the shine of his genuine leather shoes, and the expensive cologne wafting off his skin signaled something was different about him. Susan turned, smiling when she saw him. "Hey, love, you're home early today. I made your favorite dish." Charles didn't reply right away. He dropped his keys on the table with disdain and let out an impatient sigh. "Susan, we need to talk." The tone of his voice made her stop in her tracks. There was something in the way he looked at her, as if he was seeing her for the first time, and not in a good way. "What's going on? Did something happen?" He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that said he no longer belonged in that place. "Oh, something definitely happened. My life just changed. I'm the newest millionaire in this town." Susan blinked a few times, trying to wrap her head around the statement. "Millionaire? What do you mean? Remember that distant uncle who lived in Europe? Well, he died. And guess what? He left me the entire inheritance." Susan's eyes widened. She knew that story, of course. Charles's uncle had always been a mysterious and reclusive man, and sometimes they joked about the possibility of him having hidden money, but she never imagined it would actually be real. "Oh my God, Charles, that's amazing." She stepped forward to hug him, but he subtly pulled back, as if his new suit couldn't be wrinkled by such common displays of affection. "Yeah, it's amazing, all right. But there's a catch, Susan. I can't live like this anymore." The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly. "Live like what?" "Like this, in this old house, with this mediocre routine, with," he glanced around and let out a snicker, "with this little life." The shock hit Susan like an invisible punch to the gut. "You can't be serious." "I am. The truth is, I need something bigger, something better. I deserve it." The words hung between them, like a chasm opening right there in the living room where they had shared so many memories. In the following days, Charles started to drift away. Nights at home became rare, his phone calls were cold, and his glances were filled with impatience. Then finally came the invitation she never expected to receive. The background music of the upscale restaurant blended with the laughter and chatter of the patrons. Susan sat at the table, dressed to the nines in the little black dress that Charles once praised. But the way he looked at her now held no admiration. In front of her, Charles flaunted a shiny new watch on his wrist and an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Susan, I wanted to bring you here because we need to be realistic." She took a deep breath. "Realistic about what?" He swirled the wine glass between his fingers and smiled patronizingly. "About us. I've changed. You're still the same. Simple, with no ambition." Susan swallowed hard. "And that's a problem." He laughed, leaning in a bit. "Come on, Susan. Look around. Look at these people." He pointed at the well-dressed guests in the restaurant, men and women adorned with expensive jewelry and rehearsed gestures of sophistication. This is my new world," she frowned, not understanding where he was going with this. "And where do I fit into all of this?" Charles didn't answer right away. He picked up the napkin, wiped the corners of his mouth, and said with a tone of false sweetness, "You don't fit." Those words hit like a punch, a tear in her soul. But Susan stood her ground. "I see. Now that you're a man of means, a millionaire, you can't be seen with a mediocre woman like me, right?" He didn't deny it. "On the contrary, I'm glad you understand. That way, things won't be difficult for either of us." Then he played his final card. "I want a divorce as soon as possible." She looked up at him. For a moment, she thought about arguing, crying, asking why, but then she realized it wouldn't matter. Charles had already made his choice. She smiled. "All right." He blinked, surprised. "All right? Yes, but with one condition." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What condition?" "The house. I want the house in my name." Charles laughed, shaking his head as if mocking her request. "Seriously? You could get a good chunk of money in the settlement and you want that old rundown house?" She nodded. "I want it." "Okay then, if that makes you feel better. The house is yours." Susan took a deep breath, grabbed her purse, and stood up. "Good luck, Charles." She walked out without looking back. He smiled, satisfied, not realizing he had just signed his own fate. Champagne bubbled in the crystal glass as laughter echoed through the ballroom of one of the swankiest hotels in New York. Charles, now decked out in designer clothes from head to toe, moved around the room as if he had been born into this world. The tailored suit hugged his broad shoulders, and the pricey watch on his wrist sparkled under the golden lights. Around him, stunning women smiled, their dresses shimmering like rare jewels, while businessmen greeted him with firm handshakes, pretending to show respect, but really just probing for what they could get from him. Charles raised his glass and smiled, feeling on top of the world. Nothing from his old life held him back anymore. No more modest home, no more simple dinners, no more devoted wife who had shared every penny with him for years. Now, he was a man of power. But while he toasted to his new reality, someone else across the city was truly transforming her life. The smell of new fabric mingled with the aroma of fresh coffee in the old house, which now wasn't just a home, but a workshop. Susan, wearing an apron, held a pencil between her teeth as she slid her fingers over the sketches drawn on the large wooden table. Around her, rolls of fabric were stacked high. Dress forms wore dresses in progress, and the sewing machine buzzed non-stop. The sound of progress, the sound of a woman rebuilding her world piece by piece. The phone rang and she answered quickly. "Susan Evans, who's this?" "Mrs. Evans, this is Helen Carter from Vogue magazine. I heard about your work and would like to do a feature on your brand." Susan paused for a second. "Excuse me, did you say Vogue?" "Yeah. Your line has been getting a lot of attention. Powerful women love stories of overcoming adversity, and your journey is inspiring." "What do you say?" Susan closed her eyes for a moment. A year ago, she had been sitting in a restaurant, being cast aside as if she were disposable. Now, one of the most prestigious magazines wanted to interview her. She smiled. "I'd love to." As Susan climbed stairs that seemed impossible just a year ago, Charles sank deeper into his golden illusion. Thanks for sticking around. If you're enjoying the story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. The bar in the 5-star hotel was a temple of luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting golden light onto the sparkling glasses. The sound of live jazz filled the air, and the guests moved slowly, as if every step was choreographed to exude wealth. Charles leaned back against the bar, his impeccable suit contrasting with the amber whiskey in his glass. He already had everything he wanted: money, cars, hotels, women who desired him. But then, the harbinger of his downfall appeared, Karen. She sat alone, legs crossed elegantly, in a tight red dress that hugged her curves. The lipstick matched the wine glass between her fingers. Unlike the other women surrounding him, she didn't seem impressed by the scene. She looked like she was used to it. Charles couldn't help himself. He approached her with a calculated smile. "A gorgeous woman like you shouldn't be drinking alone." Karen looked up at him, sizing him up. Then she smirked, as if she already knew exactly who he was. "Maybe I'm just waiting for the right person to share my glass with." The reply caught Charles off guard. He was used to women melting at the sound of his name. But Karen, she was playing with danger, as if she knew something he didn't. "I'm Charles Evans." She took a sip, unhurried. "I know." His smile widened. "And you are?" She rested her elbow on the bar, leaning slightly toward him. "Karen. And the rest? Well, I prefer to keep a little mystery." Charles felt a shiver run down his spine. For the first time in a long while, he wanted to discover something, instead of just buying it. Karen became his new obsession. In less than 2 weeks, she was already sleeping in his penthouse, wearing his silk shirts like they were hers. She didn't talk much about her past, but that only made her more irresistible. "I've never met anyone like you, Karen." They were lying in bed after an intense night. The city sparkled beyond the glass windows, but Charles's eyes were glued to her. Karen smiled, running her fingers over his chest. "Because you've never had someone who really gets you," Charles believed her. And with each passing day, he wanted to prove just how much he was in love. She started asking for little things, a bag here, a trip there, but soon the demands grew. "Babe, is that apartment in Paris really available? It'd be perfect for us. You need to come to the jewelry event with me. I can't show up without a necklace worthy of the night, right? I was looking at an interesting investment, but I need you to transfer the money to my account first." And Charles, blinded by love, signed off on everything. Meanwhile, his business started crumbling. Important meetings got pushed back because Karen wanted a romantic dinner. $1 million contracts were ignored because she wanted to travel. But Charles didn't see this as a problem. He saw it as proof of love. One night, while Charles was drinking in his office, One of his partners called him in for a chat. "Charles, I need to be straight with you. We're losing money." Charles rolled his eyes, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Overreacting. We're just investing in new possibilities." "Possibilities?" The man laughed, incredulous. "Charles, you withdrew $500,000 from the company this month, not to mention the deals you ignored because you were busy." "Well, busy." His expression hardened. "Are you implying something?" The partner hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "I'm telling you to open your eyes." But Charles didn't want to hear it, because opening his eyes would mean seeing that something was wrong, and he wasn't ready for that yet. The morning was grey when Charles woke up, his mouth dry and a weight on his chest he couldn't quite understand. The apartment was a mess. Empty wine bottles on the table, clothes scattered across the floor, the bed empty beside him. "Karen?" No answer. He got up slowly, the hangover pounding in his head. He grabbed his phone from the nightstand and opened the banking app, more out of habit than concern. But when he looked at the screen, his blood ran cold. Available balance, 0.0. His heart raced. He blinked, trying to process what he was seeing. It had to be a mistake, a bank error. He tried to access another account, nothing. His savings, his investments, all gone. The phone slipped from his hand and fell onto the carpet. The sound was muffled, but the truth exploding in his mind was deafening. Karen had vanished and taken everything with her. Charles rushed out of the penthouse. He needed answers. He had to find her. In the lobby, he spotted the building manager and approached him like a tornado. "Karen, where's Karen?" The man looked at him with a mix of pity and discomfort. "Mr. Evans, your girlfriend left this morning. She paid the rent through the end of the month and asked me to give this to you." The manager handed over a black envelope. Charles snatched it from the man's hands and tore open the edge. Inside was a single note, written in flawless handwriting. "It was fun while it lasted. Thanks for the sponsorship. K." The words danced in front of his eyes. The air felt heavy, suffocating. "No, no, no." Charles turned to the manager, grabbing him by the arm. "Did you see her leave? With who? Did she take any bags?" The man pulled away, uncomfortable. "Sir, she left in a limousine. She seemed prepared." Charles stumbled back. Prepared? Of course. She had planned this from the start. Desperation mixed with shame. He needed help. He needed someone to pull him out of this mess. But who? He tried calling the friends who always surrounded him at parties. No answer. "Hey Richard, I need to talk to you, man. Call me back, it's urgent." Nothing. He tried another number. "Tony, I need a favor. Just a quick loan until I sort this out. You know I always pay you back." The response came minutes later, cold and straightforward. "Sorry man, I can't get involved." One by one, they all disappeared. The same people who laughed at his jokes, who raised their glasses at his lavish dinners, now wouldn't even take his calls. The truth hit him like a punch. He was alone, and then, like a bolt of lightning striking his mind, a name popped into his head. Susan. The drive to the house where he had lived with Susan felt longer than ever. With every turn, flashes of the past came rushing back, her waiting at the door with a smile, the simple dinners filled with conversation, the nights when he found a home in her arms, exhausted, and then he remembered that fateful dinner, the look of pain in her eyes, the moment he discarded her. He took a deep breath, but he had no other choice. He arrived at the house and hesitated before knocking. The fear of her disdain burned in his chest, but desperation pushed him forward. He knocked. Seconds later, the door swung open, and there she was. Susan was no longer the same woman he once knew. Her hair was perfectly styled, her dress elegant, her posture impeccable. But what hit him the hardest was her gaze, firm, confident, like someone who owed nothing to anyone. She looked at him for a moment, surprised. "Charles?" He tried to smile, but his expression was one of pure defeat. "Susan, I need to talk to you." She crossed her arms, not moving an inch. "About what?" He felt a lump in his throat. "About us." The silence between them was heavy. Then, a male voice came from inside the house. "Babe, who's there?" Charles felt the ground disappear beneath his feet, and in that moment, he realized it might be too late. The silence stretched between Charles and Susan, heavy as lead. His chest tightened when he heard the male voice coming from inside the house. The world spun slowly, and for a brief moment, he had the illusion that this couldn't be real. But it was. She stood firm in the doorway, refusing to budge an inch. "Charles?" Robert appeared beside her, a tall man with a strong presence and a calculating look. He instinctively placed a protective hand on Susan's waist. "Is there a problem?" Charles moistened his lips, tasting the bitter flavor of humiliation. He wanted to speak, but didn't know where to start. The words escaped him. He looked at Susan, searching for a trace of the woman who once loved him, but what he found was a different person. She had changed, not just in appearance, more refined, more confident, but in the way she looked at him. There was no hurt, there was no hatred, there was just indifference. "Can we talk?" Charles finally managed to say, his voice weaker than he'd like. Susan sighed and exchanged a glance with Robert, who nodded without saying a word, and stepped away, leaving them alone. She crossed her arms and stared at him, waiting. Charles took a deep breath. I messed up. With you. With everything." Susan tilted her head slightly. "How long did it take you to realize that?" "I don't even know where to start. I was an idiot. When I got that inheritance, I thought I had won the world. But I lost what really mattered." She kept her expression neutral. "And you only realize that now? What happened? You lost everything, didn't you?" That truth hit hard. He lowered his head for a moment. "I thought I was in control, but I was just a pawn. Karen used me, I was blind, and in the end, there was nothing left." Susan just watched him. No bitterness, no pity. "And what do you want from me now, Charles?" He looked at her, disoriented. I don't know. I just needed to see you. I needed to say that I'm sorry." Susan sighed. "I loved you, Charles. A lot, but you made me feel small, like I wasn't enough." "I was an idiot," he exclaimed, almost pleading. "I thought money was everything." She nodded slowly. "And now that you don't have it anymore, you realize you were wrong." Silence fell again. This time, it was even crueler. Charles looked around. The house. It wasn't just a house anymore. He noticed the changes, the sleek furniture, the minimalist art pieces. There were fashion catalogs stacked on the table, sketches of new designs scattered around, as if the space was a living studio. And then, he realized, You made it, didn't you?" Susan smiled softly, but it was a different smile. "Yes, Charles, I made it." "You have money now?" She laughed quietly. "Not just money. I have something you never had. Respect. Recognition." Charles felt his stomach churn. "What did you do?" Susan took a deep breath and adjusted her flawless blazer. "I took the only thing you left me, the house. I turned it into the first studio of my empire. Today, my brand is all over the country." She paused, and Charles realized he was facing something he had never seen before. Power. Not the kind of power that comes from inherited money, but the kind built with effort, pain, and resilience. The kind he never had. "Are you a millionaire?" "Yes." The response was firm, without any showiness, just a fact. He laughed, but it was a weak, empty laugh. "So, in the end, you won." Susan looked him in the eye. "I wasn't competing with you, Charles. That hurt more than anything." Charles rubbed his face. He felt small, and he hated it. "Susan, I'm alone," she sighed. "I'm really sorry." "You care?" He laughed bitterly. "You really care?" "Yes, Charles, but not in the way you want." He stared at her. "Could we try again?" Susan closed her eyes for a moment as if searching for patience. When she opened them, her voice was soft but unwavering. "Charles, I've moved on." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Robert reappeared at the door, casual but firm. "Everything good here?" Charles felt the tension in the air. Not a threat, but a sense of protection. Susan smiled at Robert, a genuine smile. "Yes." And it was in that smile that Charles understood. There was no more room for him in her life. And right then, he knew what it felt like to lose something that no amount of money could ever buy. Charles couldn't tell how long he stood there in front of that house that used to be his. The echoes of the past seemed to haunt him. The sound of Susan's laughter, the quiet dinners after a long day at work, the warmth of a home he never appreciated. But now, that place no longer belonged to him, and worse yet, she no longer belonged to him. Susan and Robert exchanged a knowing glance, a silent understanding that hurt him more than any words could. He realized that no matter what he said or did, there was no more room for him there. The truth hit him like a punch. He was alone, and the worst part? He deserved it. Susan stepped a little closer, her eyes soft yet firm. "Do you have somewhere to go, Charles?" He laughed, lacking any humor. "No." "And your friends?" He hung his head and ran a hand through his messy hair. "They were never my friends." She nodded slowly. "I figured as much." The silence between them was heavy, yet somehow light. There was no more anger left, no bitterness. Just the inevitable end of something that once existed. "If you could go back in time, Would you give me another chance? Susan sighed. I would have given you many chances, Charles, but you never would have noticed. He closed his eyes for a second. Yeah, she was right. She'd always been right. Charles looked around, taking in the scene. Robert was still there, discreet but present, watching with a calmness that was almost irritating. He didn't need to assert himself. His presence spoke for itself. And then Charles realized he was everything Charles had never been for Susan. Secure, strong, reliable. She now belonged to a world that he wasn't a part of. Charles took a deep breath, feeling the humiliation crawl across his skin like fire. But this time, he didn't react with anger, not with pride. He just accepted it. He took a step back. I hope you're happy, Susan, I really do. She smiled, a genuine smile. I already am, Charles. That hurt more than any slap. He nodded slowly, not having anything else to say. There was nothing left to say. Without looking back, he turned and started walking. This time there were no luxury cars, no expensive dinners, no beautiful women waiting for him in five-star hotels. Just the sound of his own footsteps echoing on the sidewalk. Night fell as he wandered aimlessly through the city that once felt too small for him. Now it seemed like a maze. The cold cut into his skin, but he barely felt it. His mind was stuck in the past. He remembered the dinner where he crushed Susan with cruel words. He recalled the parties, the luxury, the people who clung to him for money. He thought about Karen and the perfect con he fell for. And for the first time, he saw everything clearly. He hadn't lost everything. He lost himself. And now there was no one to blame but himself. He stopped in front of a shop window. His reflection stared back at him. Deep-set eyes, unshaven beard, wrinkled clothes that once screamed power, but now just revealed the downfall of a man who had the world in his hands and threw it away. Susan was right. Money came and went. But what really mattered? He never knew how to answer that question. And now, maybe it was too late to learn. Sometimes life gives us everything we've ever wanted, only to show us that it wasn't really what we needed. The shine of success can blind us, making us forget what truly matters, until suddenly we find ourselves surrounded by emptiness. Time doesn't turn back, but the lessons stick with us. Respect, love, and loyalty can't be bought. They can only be earned. And those who learn this before losing everything gain something no fortune can offer: peace. If this story kept you hooked until the end, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments, what city are you watching us from? I'd love to hear.